So now let us see devaluation, right? So far we have seen depreciation. Depreciation happens because of the demand and supply forces. The demand and supply forces actually impact the foreign exchange rate. So that is the scenario in the flexible exchange rate regime. In case of fixed exchange rate regime, this fall in the external value, this is known as devaluation, right? So devaluation is basically the deliberate downward adjustment. So this deliberate downward adjustment is done by the government or the central bank of the concerned country, right? So in case of fixed exchange rate regime, it is the government or the central bank which is responsible for fixing the exchange rate, and when that authority brings down the external value of the exchange rate, brings down the external value of the domestic currency, then that is called devaluation. Now the question arises, why at all any country will do the devaluation? Why at all any country would like to reduce the value of its currency in the external market? The reason is very simple. Just like depreciation of the currency, one of the positive impact of the devaluation is that it positively impacts the export sector, right? So exports are incentivized and the imports are discouraged because it increases the import bill, right? So exports are increased and imports are decreased. So this creates a favorable current account balance scenario. So this is the prime reason why this devaluation is done. Now you can ask, sir, is there any example, real life example you can give? Yes, I can give the real life example. In the real life, the countries like China, they are practicing this devaluation. So the countries like China, they do not have the 100% flexible exchange rate regime. Still, they are following kind of fixed exchange rate regime only. Not apparently, but definitely. So they devalue their currency whenever they see that their exports are decreasing. So they have done this already. We will see. So devaluation is a deliberate downward adjustment of the value of country's money relative to any other currency. Countries that have a fixed exchange rate, right? So this happens in case of fixed exchange rate or semi-fixed exchange rate. So this is the case of China. Use this monetary policy tool. It is often confused with depreciation, right? So the impacts of devaluation is exactly similar to the depreciation. The impacts are same, but the factor which lead to the devaluation is different. The factor is the government intervention, right? This is opposite of the revaluation. So revaluation is basically increase in the external value. Now devaluation, this means reduction in the external value of the home currency. It is aimed. So what is the aim? The aim of devaluation is increasing export of the country. It is usually resorted to correct the deficit in the balance of trade or current account balance, right? So because of the increase in export and decrease in import, this will actually result into the trade surplus, which will ultimately result into the current account surplus, right? So you can see real world example. China has been accused of practicing a quiet currency devaluation, trying to make itself a more dominant force in the trade market. How it is trying to make more dominant force? By increasing the export. So through the devaluation, the exports are incentivized, and when there are more export, that means more and more market can be captured. On August 5, 2019, the People's Bank of China set yuan's daily reference rate below 7% dollar for the first time in over a decade. This in response to a new tariff of 110% on $300 billion worth of Chinese import imposed by the Trump administration, set to go into effect from September 1, 2019. So there has been a China in the USA-China trade war, right? So because of this USA-China trade war, USA imposed the import duty on the Chinese product. So to counter that, the China actually devalued its currency so that the cost of its product in the export market come down, and this tariff, it will actually get nullified. The Trump administration responded by labeling China a currency manipulator. So the USA said that China is a currency manipulator. It is just the latest salvo in the US-China trade war. So this is basically one of the component of the US-China trade war, but certainly not the first time China has devalued its currency. So it is not the first time that China has done this. You can see effects of devaluation. So this is very similar to the effects of depreciation, exactly same in fact. So if there is devaluation, import become expensive, export become cheaper, right? If import become expensive, the import quantity is declined. If export become cheaper, export quantity is increased, and it actually results into the current account balance improvement, right? And if export is increased, import is decreased, the aggregate demand rises. It results into inflation and also economic growth. We have already discussed the exactly same diagram in case of depreciation. So please read this question. I am giving you 1 minute and then we will discuss. So, consider the following actions which the government can take, and which of the above action or actions can help in reducing the current account deficit. So the question is about how to reduce the current account deficit. Statement 1, devaluing the domestic currency. So what is the impact? Impact is increase in the exports and decrease in the imports. Because of increase in the export and decrease in the import, there can be reduction in the current account deficit, right? So statement 1 is correct. Reduction in export duty. If export duty is reduced, export subsidy, not duty, it is subsidy. What is the subsidy? Subsidy is basically the benefit which the government gives to the exporter. So through the subsidy, the government wants to encourage the exporter. Government wants that exporters be benefited, right, through the subsidy. If the subsidy is reduced, that means the export will come down. If the export comes down, the trade balance will come down and current account deficit cannot be reduced, right? So the statement 2 is completely incorrect. Statement 3, adopting suitable policies which attract greater FDI and more fund from the funds, right? Yeah, it will attract FDI, but that is the capital transaction. That is the capital account transaction, right? This is the capital account transaction. This is not the current account transaction. So even this is incorrect as far as controlling the current account deficit is concerned, because we are talking about the current account deficit. So this capital account is not going to help. So which is the correct answer? Answer is option A, statement 1 only. Next question, again I am giving you 1 minute. So just read these two statements and identify whether A is correct or not, R is correct or not, and whether R is the correct justification of the A. Okay, so A, assertion, devaluation of a currency may promote export. Yes, this is very correct. We have discussed many times. R, price of the country's products in the international market may fall due to devaluation. This is also true, right? So A is the correct, so R is the correct explanation of the A, right? So both A and R are in correct one. Now revaluation. So revaluation is basically opposite of devaluation. This is opposite of devaluation, right? So when the government or the central bank increases the external value of domestic currency intentionally, then this is called revaluation. So in case of revaluation, the external value of the domestic currency is increased by the authority. So this is also a deliberate attempt. This also happens in the fixed exchange rate regime. So a revaluation is calculated or intentional or done by the authority. Upward adjustment to a country's official exchange rate relative to a chosen baseline, right? So the chosen baseline can be wage rate or price of gold or foreign currency, right? So this is basically nothing but linking the exchange rate to some standard. So in case of fixed exchange rate, this actually happens, that the exchange rate of the domestic currency is linked to some external factor. So this factor can be the wage rate or gold price or US dollar price or SDR of IMF, euro or any currency. So they will link the price of the domestic currency to any external indicator, right? So when there is an upward movement, right, in the linking, then this is called revaluation. In a fixed exchange regime, only a country's government, such as its central bank, can change the official value of the currency. Currency revaluation can be triggered by why this will happen? Variety of event, including changes in the interest rate between the various countries, right? So this can happen because of changes in the interest rate or the large scale events that impact the country. This is opposite of depreciation. This is completely opposite of depreciation, right? This means increase in the external value of home currency. And what is the aim? The aim is actually decreasing the export of the country. And it is usually resorted to correct the surplus in the balance of trade or current account balance. Now the concept of appreciation. The concept of appreciation is exactly opposite to the concept of depreciation, right? The concept of appreciation is exactly opposite to the concept of depreciation, right? So this appreciation and depreciation both happen because of the market forces. Both happen in the flexible exchange rate regime, right? And in both the cases, it is the demand and supply forces which determine the exchange rate. In case of devaluation, the exchange rate is increasing and the external value is coming down. In case of appreciation, in the current scenario, the exchange rate comes down and external value goes up. So this is the reverse case. So fall in the exchange rate, that is increase in the external value of domestic currency. So because of additional demand of the home currency or excess supply of the foreign currency, right? So this excess supply of the foreign currency, this is one of the reason why between 2018 and 19 there has been appreciation in the value of Indian currency. So there has been huge supply of foreign currency because of high FDI and FII, right? Or there can be additional demand of the home currency. So what can be the reasons for the appreciation? Number one, if the central bank increases the policy interest rate. So if the policy interest rate are increased, that means the foreign investors, they will be attracted to India. They will be incentivized to invest into India. And that will increase the FDI and FII into India. That will increase the supply of the foreign currency into India. If there is increase in the foreign currency supply, the value of the foreign currency will come down and the value of domestic currency will go up. Number two, current account surplus. So when there is good amount of export, in that case also there can be appreciation, right? So because of current account surplus, there will be inflow of foreign exchange and it will lead to the appreciation in the exchange rate of the domestic currency. Increase in the export, right? So this is basically the same as 2 only. Because of increase in the export only, there will be current account surplus, which will lead to the increase in the foreign currency. Intervention by the central bank through open market operations. So even the open market operation, through the open market operations, the central bank can buy the domestic currency from the foreign exchange market and it can actually lead to the appreciation of the domestic currency, right? High economic growth, this can also lead to the foreign investment. So all these are the reasons for the rupee appreciation in any country. Now, what are the impacts of the rupee appreciation? Number one, exports become less competitive, right? So in case of the rupee depreciation, export became more cheaper, export revenue increased. In case of appreciation, this is completely opposite. Export become less competitive, this leads to decrease in the country's export. Number two, import become more cheaper and thus there is an overall increase in the import. Number three, the value of the remittances is coming from abroad decreases in the domestic currency, right? So the impacts are completely opposite to the impacts of the depreciation. You can see effects of appreciation. So because of appreciation, the imports become cheaper, right? The value of imports goes down. That means the quantity of imports is increased. When the import quantity is increased, and on the other hand, export become more expensive. And because the export become more expensive, the quantity of export comes down. So imports are increased and exports are reduced. This means the current account balance deteriorates. So current account deficit, it increases basically, right? And because of increase in the import, decrease in the export, the aggregate demand for the domestic industries it goes down, right? And because of the reduction in the aggregate demand, the GDP goes down. That means even the economic growth goes down, right? Economic growth goes down. Coming here, if the imports become cheaper, so there are certain products which we import, for example oil prices, oil products. So in that case the inflation comes down, right? So it actually helps controlling the inflation. So appreciation impact is successive appreciation of domestic currency can make BOP adverse because it actually adversely impact the export. Overall inflation can be decreased. This is the benefit. Now there is a new term, currency crisis, right? So till now we have covered everything about exchange rate fluctuation. This currency crisis is an extreme case. This is an extreme case of decline in the external value of the domestic currency. And this decline is not intentional. This is suddenly, this is out of control, right? So this crisis means anything which happens suddenly, which is out of control. So in case of currency, this currency crisis involves the sudden and steep decline in the value of a nation's currency, which causes negative ripple effects throughout the economy. Unlike a currency devaluation as part of a trade war, a currency crisis is not purposeful event. It is not a purposeful event and is to be avoided, right? So currency devaluation is a purposive and deliberate attempt, but this currency crisis is not a purposive, it is out of control. But a currency crisis such as hyperinflation, so it can happen because of the hyperinflation. So because of the hyperinflation, our exports become completely uncompetitive, and because of that the external value of money comes down suddenly. But a currency crisis such as hyperinflation is often the result of a shoddy real economy, right? So this is actually indicating if there is high inflation, that means the supply chains are poor, infrastructure is poor, the production is not happening, right? Underlying the nation's currency. In other words, a currency crisis is often the symptom and not the disease of the greater economic malaise, right? So if in any country the currency crisis happens, this is not actually the cause, rather this is the symptom of the real economic problem, right? The real economic problem can be in the form of infrastructure deficit, poor technology, poor quality of the manpower, poor ease of doing business environment. Because of all these factors, there is no production happening, resulting into hyperinflation, which resulting into no export or very low export, resulting into the currency crisis, right? So currency crisis is actually the outcome of the poor economy. It is not the reason. Real life example is Asian crisis of 1997, right? So we will not get into detail of 1997 Asian crisis, that will take a lot of time. So you just need to understand that this is the concept. Central bank and the government can intervene to help stabilize the currency by selling of reserves of foreign currency or gold, or by intervening in the foreign exchange markets. Now this last concept in this lecture, hard currency, right? Hard currency. What is the meaning of hard currency? So any currency which is acceptable by everyone and which is liquid also. Liquid means which can be sold very, very easily. So can you give the example? The example is US dollar, right? So US dollar is one of the example of hard currency. So hard currency is a currency which is widely accepted around the world as a form of payment for goods and services. So anyone and everyone is ready to accept that as a mode of payment. US dollar is something which everyone in this world can accept, because the person knows that he or she can give to anyone and everyone will accept. A hard currency is expected to remain relatively stable. So the value of hard currency remains stable through a short period of time and to be highly liquid. That means it can be sold and purchased anytime by anyone. The hard currency generally comes from a nation with a strong economic and political situation like USA, right? So this is the meaning of the hard currency. So with this I complete this session, right? So our exchange rate topic is also complete. In the next sessions we will come up with the rupee convertibility and the concepts like trade agreements, WTO, etc. Right? So major portion of the exchange rate, major portion of the balance of payment and the external sector is complete. This is over. You can solve maximum number of questions that came in the previous year from this discussion only. Right? Thank you very much. God bless you.